So let's start adding hatches and gradients to our drawing, and we will start with the simple hatch pattern. So here we have a simple drawing, and in this case we have this drawing divided into many different parts using the geometries, and we will apply different patterns of hatches on different areas. So I'll start with the hatch tool here on the draw panel. So click on this hatch tool and that will open this hatch creation tab. So this tab will remain active as long as the command is active, and here we have all the options which are related to hatch. So let's start with the first option, which is pick points. So select this pick point, click on it once, and the cursor will change into this point selection cursor. By default also the cursor will look like this point selection cursor, but if your cursor is different, if it is like this, the pick box type, then click on this pick points to change it to this point selection cursor. Now let's move to the drawing area, and when you'll move, you'll notice that whenever the cursor finds an island, the hatch pattern will be applied there. So as I moved my cursor here, the complete area got highlighted and the hatch will be applied here. Now let's move my cursor, I'll move it to this area, and now the hatch will be applied here. So you can see that the hatch pattern will change depending upon the area where I am clicking. So in this case, the hatch pattern will be applied here, and you can see the preview here. So let's now select this area for applying our hatch. Okay, so now our pattern is applied and the default pattern of NC31 is here. Obviously this is not looking like this NC31 pattern because the scale is not correct, which will change. But first we need to look into other patterns also. So we currently see this solid angle NC31 and NC32 patterns, but there are a lot more patterns available in this hatch tool. So let's click on this small arrow right beside this pattern panel, and it will show all the remaining patterns which are available here. So you can select any of these patterns from this list, and you can even create your own pattern if you want. So I'll select this gravel pattern for this case, and even when I change my pattern to gravel, still it's looking like a solid pattern. Obviously we'll take care of this also. So let's first move to the next option here. So here on the properties panel, we can change all of the properties which are related to the current hatch. And the first property that we need to change is the scale. Obviously the scale is not correct. That's why we are seeing this as a solid hatch. So here we have the scale option, which is set to 1. Now let's change the scale value to 100 and press enter or tab key. And now the hatch pattern is visible. So we need to change scale to even higher value. So let's change it to 200, press enter, and now this looks appropriate. So I'll keep this scale. So now the scale has been applied. Let's look at the other options here. So obviously we have applied the pattern. You can select what we want to apply. For example, either solid, the gradient, which we'll learn in a moment, and also the pattern. Obviously we have some user defined patterns also, and if you have defined, you can select that as well, but that we are not going to select for now. Now here in this drop down, we have an option of changing hatch color. So currently by layer is selected, so that simply means the color of layer will be applied to the hatch, but you can select any of these colors, and obviously you can go to more colors if you want to select from any of these tabs. So obviously we don't need to change the color as of now. And here we have the background color for our hatch. So if you want to change the background color for your hatch, you can select this option here. So obviously in this way you can select the background color. So we are not going to change that also. Now we have the option of hatch transparency, which is set to 0. So obviously in this case also you can change this transparency value from 0 to 90, 90 being the highest value, and that will make your hatch pattern a little bit dim. So you can move this transparency slider towards right, and as you can see that the transparency is changing and it's making our hatch pattern more dim, and you can move it here to keep the default value. Also we have an angle here which is set to 0, so you can change this value, and this angle will rotate the pattern, the current pattern of your hatch. So you can change that value. For example, let's enter 45, press enter, and you can see there is a rotation in the pattern of these hatches. Although it won't be apparent or very much visible in this gravel pattern, it will be very much visible with other straight line pattern. So that also will look. For now I'll change this value back to 0. Okay, so now we have changed these properties. Let's expand this properties panel and look at one more option here. Now here we have an layer assignment. So currently you can see that the hatch pattern is assigned to this line layer. So if you want to assign it to any other layer, you can select it from here. For example, I'll select this hatch layer, which is already made for these hatches. So now only these hatch patterns will be assigned on that hatch layer, and obviously we'll learn about layer in the next module. So once these settings are done, simply click on close hatch creation. And here we have our final hatch. Now that's not the only way of making hatches, and there are also other ways of making it. So I'll simply select this hatch pattern and I'll delete it. Now let's go to this hatch tool again. And once again, we'll select some areas. So first I'll select this area, and then I'll select this area, this one, and this one. So in all of these areas, we need to change the pattern. So obviously this gravel pattern is not required here. So I'll click on this arrow to expand this list of hatches, and I'll select the NC31 pattern. So that's the pattern which is applied here. Now, if you want to add more areas, you can obviously select it by simply selecting the island here, or you can also select this option, the select option, and that will allow you to select the boundaries. So now you'll see that your cursor changed into a pick box, and you can simply click on the boundaries now, and that area will be selected for your hatch. You can simply repeat the process for this side as well, and here it is. So these are two different ways of selecting hatches, either with a pick point or with the pick box. Obviously, if you need to remove some of the boundaries, you can select this remove option, click on the boundaries to remove the hatch patterns. So here we have it. So now we'll apply this hatch pattern, and we'll change the angle also. So in this case, you can see that the angle is 45 degrees, but that will be the default angle of hatch. Now let's move on to this angle option, which is set to 0. So now you can change this angle, and when you'll change this angle, so let's now change it to 45 and press enter. You'll notice that the lines will become completely vertical. So in this case, the angle measurement will start from the current angle of your hatch. Initially, the hatch was inclined at an angle of 45 degrees. So changing its angle to 45 degree will add 45 degrees more. So that will become a 90-degree angle with respect to the positive side of x-axis. That's why we have this vertical angle here. So I'll change it back to 0. And we have many other options here, like the origin, associative hatch, and there are some other options in this options panel. So that will look in upcoming videos. For now, I'll simply uncheck this associative option, and I'll not change any of these properties, and simply I'll select this close hatch creation. And here we have it. The hatches are now applied. So in this way, you can create simple hatches in AutoCAD. Okay, so now let's have a look at some of the other options of hatches, like set origin and associative hatches. So here we have these two simple rectangles, and both of them are of same dimensions. Now let's move on to this hatch tool, and I'll select this NC31 pattern. I'll keep this pick points active, and now click on this area. So in this case, I've selected this area of the rectangle, and here make sure this associative option is checked. Now I'll simply close this hatch. Now we'll create a new hatch pattern here, but this time we'll make it non-associative. So once again, I'll go to this hatch tool, same settings in this case also, but simply uncheck this associative option. So now click on this area and close hatch creation. So you'll find no visible difference in between these two hatch patterns, although one of them is associative and the second one is not associative. So let's select this hatch pattern, and in this case you'll see this simple grip. Now in this case we have the grip at the center, but we also have the boundary grips. Now that's not the only difference. In this case, let's select the boundary or the rectangle, and let's move it. And the hatch pattern changed itself. Now let's do the same thing here. I'll select this and I'll move the boundary, but now the hatch did not move. It's still at its initial position. So that's the actual difference between an associative and a not associative or non-associative hatch. In this case, you have additional boundaries along with the hatch. So now here we have the boundaries, and you can use these boundaries to move the hatch pattern like this. Now let's press Ctrl Z to get back to the original rectangles, and now we'll learn about the origin option. So let's select this hatch pattern, and this time I'll select a different pattern. Let's select this ARB816 pattern, and now click in this area. Now the hatch pattern scale is quite big and we need to change it. We need to actually decrease its value in order to see it clearly. So I'll go to this scale and I'll change its value to 0.1 and press enter. Okay, so that's the hatch pattern here. Now look at the hatch pattern which is applied here. Now in this case, the pattern started from any random point and it's now following the rest of the geometry, but we don't have control over the full block size. Now let's say that we want a full block on this corner. We want the complete block to start from this side and we want the rest of the block to follow that pattern. Now for that case, you can specify an origin point, and to do that, select this set origin option and click at a point where you want to specify the origin. In this case, it will be this point. Now click here and you'll notice a change here. Now this side we have this complete block and rest of the blocks will follow this origin. Similarly, if you want to change the origin, you can select it here as well or any other point. I'll go to set origin again and I'll click at this point. Now the origin changed to this point. So that's the set origin tool. You can use this tool on other patterns also. For example, I'll select the same hash tool. I'll select the NC31 pattern and I'll change the scale to 1. And let's apply the hatch here. Now if you zoom into this area, you'll notice that the hatches are not starting from this vertex. Now what if you want the hatch to start from this vertex? Obviously you can change the origin. So go to set origin, click on the vertex, and the first hatch will start from this vertex and rest of the hatches will follow the pattern. So in this way you can precisely change the pattern of hatches and you can specify the origins, and it will be very helpful in many cases. For example, if you want to make a tiled pattern somewhere on the wall, then this can be really helpful in deciding the side where you want the full tile to remain visible. So let's now click on this close hatch creation. And that was all about the set origin and associative option of hatches. Now let's have a look at some of the advanced features of the hatch tool. Now here we have a fairly complicated geometry, and in this case we have multiple areas which are again inside any other area. For example, the first rectangle, then the second one, circle, rectangle. So one area is within the next and there is another area within the next. Now let's go to the hatch tool and I'll select this NC31 pattern for the sake of simplicity and I'll start applying the hatches. So in the first case, when you select any area, the island will be detected or the immediate boundaries from the point where you click will be detected. So in this case, the outer boundary will be the circle and the inner boundary will be this rectangle. Now whatever the area falls in between these two extreme boundaries will be hatched. So that's the simple island detection. Now if you want the hatch tool to ignore this kind of island detection, you can change its options. So go to this options panel and expand it, and from here you can find this island detection tool. So click on this drop down and select ignore island detection. Now move back to the same area, and this time we don't have any inner island detection. Simply the rectangle is ignored, and if you click inside the rectangle, obviously there is no other island and it will completely hatch it. But if you select this area, once again all the internal geometries will be ignored. There will be no island detection. Obviously the outer island will still be recognized. So in this way you can change this option, and it is really helpful if you have plenty of objects inside any outer boundary that you want to include in your hatch. Now let's go to this options, and from here once again select this normal island detection, and we once again have this island detection. Now let's select the hatch tool once again, and I'll try to apply the hatch in this area. So when I move my cursor here, the hatch will be easily applied. If I select this area, the hatch will again be applied. But when I move my cursor to this area, the hatch will not be applied, and there is a very simple reason for that. Here we have a small gap. So currently the closed boundaries are not found, and that's why the hatches are not applied. But if you try to apply the hatch in this area, there will be a warning message, and this simply states that a closed boundary is not determined. But that simply does not mean that you cannot apply any hatch pattern in this area. You can still apply the hatches in this area using the gap tolerance. So I'll close this hatch creation, and I'll remove both of these hatches, and now I'll once again select this hatch pattern. Now I'll click in this area, and obviously you'll find this error message. Now we need to change some values in order to apply the hatch here. Now go to this options panel, expand it, and here you'll see this gap tolerance option. So you need to increase the gap tolerance, and the gap tolerance value should be approximately larger than the value of gap here. So whatever the gap is here, the value of gap tolerance should be greater than that. So I'll simply type DI to find out the gap here, and the gap here is 4.70 units. So let's add a value of 5 in gap tolerance. So select the hatch pattern, expand this panel, and add a gap tolerance of 5 and press enter. Now let's go to this area again and click here, and now we have this message box, which is different from the message box which we saw earlier. And here we have this continue hatching this area option. So select it, and the hatch will be applied here, and that's only because of gap tolerance. Now click on close hatch creation, and here we have it. The hatch is applied even when there is an open area. So now let's erase it, and let's look at other options. So once again, I'll select the hatch pattern, and now I'll select multiple areas to create our hatches. So I'll select these 3 areas, and now I'll close the hatch creation. Now in this case, when you click on any of these hatches, you'll find that all of these hatches are selected because I've selected all of these areas in a single run to make this hatch, and that's why they are treated as a single unit. Now you can make them as separate hatches by making the hatches one by one. So you can make this hatch, then exit the command, then make this hatch pattern and exit the command and repeat the process for the last one. Or you can also select a different approach. So I'll first erase this hatch pattern, and now once again I'll go to the hatch tool, select the first area, the second one, and the third area. Now here expand this options, and here we have a create separate hatches option. So click on this create separate hatches. So that will ensure that these hatches will be treated as separate entities. And now click on close hatch creation. Now select any of these, and they are completely separate from one another. There is also a draw order for hatches. So I'll erase this complete hatch pattern, and now once again I'll select the hatch, and I'll select any area. So let's select this area first. Now in this case, we have a boundary and also we have an hatch. We don't know whether the hatch is overlapping the boundary or it's other way around. So in order to check that, again expand the options panel, and here you will find the option. So currently the hatches are behind the boundary. As you can see here, it's sent behind the boundary option, which is now selected. So let's keep that option active. The hatches are behind the boundary, and close the hatch creation. Let's go to the hatch again, and this time change the option, and let's change it to bring in front of the boundary, and apply the hatch here and close it. Okay, so in this case the hatch is above the boundary, here behind the boundary. Let's see the difference. Let's move on to the boundaries here, and in this case you will be able to select the boundaries because the hatches are behind the boundary. Now in this case, when you move to the boundary, the hatch will be selected, and that's quite evident because the hatch is overlapping the boundary. So that's the subtle difference between these two hatch patterns. You can also change the draw order of hatches, and to make it clear, I'll once again create a new hatch pattern. So select this hatch, click on this area to apply the hatch pattern, and I'll change the color of this hatch to red. And now here we have this options. Let's click on this drop down, and here we have many options here like the send to back and bring to front. So let's select this send to back option, and now click on close hatch creation. Now the current hatch pattern has been sent to back, but it's obviously not making any difference. So in order to see the difference, let's bring the hidden text. I have already created a text here, so I'll just bring it in the drawing area using this end object isolation, and now you can see clearly that the hatch is behind this text. Now what if you want to bring this hatch above the text? For that you can modify this hatch. Select the hatch, once again go to the options, and from here bring it to front. So let's select this bring to front and close the hatch, and now you can see that this hatch is clearly overlapping the text. So that's the difference between the different draw orders. So in the previous case it was behind the text, and now it's above the text. So you can select any of these options. So that was all about some of the advanced features of hatch. So let's have a look at the boundary and wipeout tools. So I'll start with the boundary tool, and here we have the simple drawing. Now in this case, let's say that we want to find the area of this region. So obviously we can use the area tool, and that's an efficient way, but still we have an alternate way of doing that, and that's by creating the boundary. So here on the draw panel, when you expand this hatch flyout, you'll see this boundary option. Select it, and now you'll see this boundary creation option. Now we have a pick point here, and also we have the object type. So here in the object type, select polyline, and now select this pick point and click at this point. Now when you click at this point, you'll notice that this complete area will be highlighted. So that's the boundary which will be created. Now press enter, and we have a boundary. Now click on this boundary, and the boundary is highlighted. It's now selected, and you can find the area of this complete polyline to find the area of this region. And you can simply do that by going to the property palette. So right click, go to the properties, and scroll it down, and here we have the area, which is 3662.305 square units, and also the perimeter or the length of this complete boundary. So that's quite an easy way of finding the area, and there are also many other applications of this boundary tool. Also, you can use this geometry separately, so you can click on this boundary, move it elsewhere, and you can use it. Similarly, you can create a boundary with the region tool. So in this case, the boundary has been created with polyline, as you can see on the tooltip. Now I'll select the same boundary tool, and this time I'll change the object type to region. Now click on the pick point, and this time I'll select this pick point, press enter. Now we have a region boundary, and obviously you can move it using this grip, and here also you can find the area using the property palette. So we have the area and perimeter and also the boundary, so you can use any of these methods. So let's now erase both of these boundaries. In AutoCAD, the hatch patterns have a unique property of avoiding any object which is already present in the island. For example, here we have this text. Now I'll apply hatch pattern on this island or in this area. For that, I'll select the hatch tool and select this NC31 pattern and click on this area. Now when you click on this area, you'll notice that the hatch will completely ignore the area which is covering this text. In that way, the text will remain legible against the background. Now click on this close hatch creation, and here we have the hatch. Now what if you decide to make this text after creating the hatch? In that case, the hatch will completely overlap the text, and for those cases you can use the wipeout tool. So let's create a hatch here, and then we'll copy this text here. So go to the hatch tool and click on this area, and let's change the color of this hatch to green in order to clearly separate both of these hatches, and click on close hatch creation. Now we'll copy this text on this area or on this hatch. So select the copy tool, click on the text, press enter, move it on this area. Now we don't have any clear boundaries here, and obviously the text is not very clearly visible against the hatch background. So there are a couple of ways to make it very clear, and in order to remove these hatches along the boundary of this text, you can use the wipeout feature. So before using the wipeout feature, I'll make a rectangle. So go to the rectangle and create a rectangular boundary around this text. So this text boundary will be used for clearing up the hatches. Now select the wipeout tool. So expand the draw panel and select the wipeout tool from here. Now we have an option here, which is polyline. Select this polyline and select the polyline here. And here we have an option of erasing the polyline. So whether we want to erase the polyline or not, you can select it here. I'll select yes, we want to erase the polyline. So now the hatch patterns are clear, but we still have a problem. The text is not visible, and in order to bring this text in the front of hatch and in order to make it visible, we need to change its draw order. So select the text. When you'll move your cursor, you'll see that the text will be highlighted and you can select it. Now type draw order and press enter. Now we need to move it to the front. So simply select this front option and here we have it. The text is now visible. Now there are also other ways of clearing the area. So I'll select this rectangle and I'll erase it, and simply by erasing the rectangle we can again bring back the hatches. Now I'll go to this wipeout tool once again, and now I'll create a frame around this text. So you can simply click on different points to create the frame. You don't need to necessarily have a frame or a polyline, and here we have it. Now simply press enter. And here we have the wipeout region, and in this case also, in order to bring it to the front, you need to select the text and change its draw order. So select the draw order, click on front, here we have the text. Now the frame is visible in these cases. Now if you want to hide these frames also from the drawing area, you can use wipeout frame system variable. So type wipeout frame, press enter, and now change its value to 0. And we don't have any frame boundary here. So in this way you can change the values of the system variable to make this wipeout frame even more visible. So that was all about wipeout and boundary tools. In this video I will tell you about creating gradients, which are different patterns of colors in our AutoCAD drawing. So for creating the gradients, go to the draw panel and expand the flyout and select the gradient tool. Now you'll see a very familiar hatch creation tab, but we have some simple difference here. In the pattern we have these gradients, the color gradients, and also we have a new centered option here. Now we can select the pattern of colors which we want to apply from this list. So let's select this gradient linear. Now go to any area, and obviously it will detect the island as it did in the previous case of hatch creation, and it will apply the gradient there. We have a gradient of yellow to blue transition, and that's selected here, the gradient linear pattern. Now if you want to change the colors of this gradient, you can select this menu and you can change the colors from here. So I'll select red as the first color, and for the second color let's change it to this cyan. Now we have this transition here. If you want to apply the gradient in more than one area, then you can also select multiple islands here. And to exit this, simply click on close hatch creation. Now let's go to the gradient tool again, and this time I'll select this circular area. Now in this semicircular area we have this linear gradient, but I'll change it to this centered. Now I'll select this area also, and you'll see that in this case the complete circle will be taken as the hatch boundary. Now the gradient is applied here, and also we have a centrally aligned highlighted area. If you want to change that, if you want to change the highlighted area, you can simply uncheck the centered option, and that will make this highlighted area off-centric, just like this. Now in this case, if you want the hatch to apply on this complete circle, then make sure that this create separate hatches is unchecked. So currently the create separate hatches is checked, so click on this to uncheck it, and now both of these hatches will be treated as a single region. Click on close hatch creation, and we have a single hatch here, just like this, although we had a boundary here. So that's very much similar to the hatch creation, but instead of making hatch pattern, we have the colored gradients. Now if you want to apply a solid color, then select the gradient, or you can also select the hatch tool and select the solid pattern from this list. So select the solid, select the color which you want to apply. For example, in this case, let's select this color and select the area where you want to apply it and click on close hatch creation. And there we have it, the solid color applied to the island. So that was all about the gradient tool of AutoCAD. So here is our question related to the module. We need to create an associative hatch in a rectangle of length 10 and width 5 unit with these properties. The pattern should be NC31. The origin of that pattern should be lower left vertex of the rectangle, and the scale should be any scale which is clearly visible, and the scale in which the lines of the hatch pattern are clearly visible. So here we have the drawing. Let's start with the rectangle tool. So I'll click on rectangle and click at a point. Now I'll type at and a length of 10 and a width of 5 unit and press enter. So there we have it. Now we need to add the pattern here. So for that, I'll go to this hatch tool and make sure this NC31 is selected. Also, we need to ensure that this associative option is checked. So with these two options, click inside this area. And here we have it. The hatch is quite clearly visible, but if it is not visible in your case, you can go to this scale and change it. In this case, I'll change it to 2 and press enter. There we have it. Now it's widely spaced, and now we need to change only one property here. We need to change the origin. So in this case, the origin should be lower left, which is this point. So let's zoom into this area. So here you can clearly see that the origin is not clearly specified and the line is starting from somewhere on this horizontal line. So we need to ensure that this line should start from this vertex. For that, I'll click on set origin and click on this vertex. There we have it. Now it's starting from the required point. Now let's zoom out, and there we have it, the final hatch pattern. So let's now click on close hatch creation, and there we have it, the drawing as per the requirement.